Imagine stepping into a rustic Appalachian mountain cabin, maybe about 100 years ago. Right away, you're hit with these amazing smells. Slow-curing meats, bubbling fruit preserves, tangy fermented veggies. For centuries, the folks living in the Blue Ridge and beyond relied on this incredibly resourceful set of survival skills just to get their communities through those brutal winters. They didn't have electricity. They didn't have modern refrigeration. But what they did have was generational science. Honestly, it's fascinating. But over the last few decades, there's been this quiet, massive clash between those centuries-old mountain food traditions and modern bureaucratic regulations. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into exactly how dozens of these ingenious Appalachian food practices were literally outlawed. Okay, so to really get the vibe of this tension, let's look at a story that just perfectly captures it. Picture this. It's 1962 in Pike County, Kentucky. A local man gets slapped with a $200 fine. His crime? Well, he served his very own home-cured ham at his daughter's wedding. That's it. This ham had been hanging in his family's smokehouse for 18 months, developing this beautiful, hard mahogany rind. The catch? His grandfather built that smokehouse way back in 1893 with a dirt floor. And the county health inspector, he took one look and declared it absolutely did not meet modern code. Just like that, a survival tradition that fed entire communities for 200 years was suddenly branded a health violation. Wild, right? So, to really unpack how all these mountain hacks were banned, we're going to look through four main lenses today. First up, necessary interventions. Second, the cost of standardized science. Third, criminalizing community. And lastly, the end of wild harvesting. All right, let's jump right into Section 1, necessary public health interventions, or when tradition actually was toxic. Now, as we get into this, we have to be totally fair. While a lot of modern regulations can feel incredibly overbearing, some of them genuinely had to happen to save lives. Not every mountain tradition was actually safe, and eventually, science had to step in. Take this silent killer that was hiding right in plain sight: lead glazes. If you walked into pretty much any mountain kitchen before 1970, you'd see these gorgeous brown and cream stoneware crocks. Appalachian potters had been using lead glazes since the 1700s. Why? Because it melted at low temperatures, sealed the clay perfectly, and gave the pottery this signature beautiful warm shine. But here's the tragic part. Generations of grandmothers were storing highly acidic foods, think buttermilk and fermented kraut, right in those crocks. And that acid was slowly leaching deadly lead into every single meal. Nobody had a clue until 1971 when the CDC finally issued a formal warning. That led to state health code bans by 1978. Today, it's actually a federal violation to sell food prepared in unlined antique pottery. Here's another one that absolutely had to go. For generations, squirrel brain gravy served over biscuits was actually considered a massive delicacy in parts of Kentucky and West Virginia. Honestly, it was just a resourceful way to make sure absolutely no meat went to waste. But in the late 1990s, doctors at the University of Kentucky noticed something terrifying. They identified a cluster of variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease cases among patients who had eaten this exact dish. If you don't know, this is a neurological condition similar to mad cow disease, and it is 100% fatal, no cure. Today, selling squirrel meat with the head intact is illegal in most jurisdictions. Even the most steadfast old-timers out there agree this is one tradition that needs to stay in the history books, and yeah, I'm right there with them. Moving on to Section 2, the cost of standardized science, where things were completely safe but completely undocumented. So we're shifting gears here to the real tragedy of this story. Perfectly safe, scientifically sound, traditional methods getting outlawed simply because they didn't fit neatly into modern, documentable, temperature-controlled bureaucratic boxes. Before electricity, pretty much every mountain homestead had what was called a spring house. It was this small stone building straddling a cold creek. The running water kept milk, butter, and meat at a perfectly steady 52 degrees all year round. This method had a 150-year perfect track record of keeping food safe with zero power. But the modern FDA food code, it strictly requires commercial dairy to be kept at 41 degrees or below, complete with continuous electronic temperature monitoring. The source material notes that in 2014, a small dairy in Virginia actually tried to revive springhouse-aged cheese. Their reward? They were forced to drop $30,000 on a modern refrigeration system just to legally comply. And let's look at another brilliant piece of undocumented indigenous science: pokeweed, or poke salad. This plant grows wild literally everywhere in the region, but it is highly poisonous if you don't know exactly what you're doing. But mountain women figured it out 300 years ago. They perfected this incredible triple boil method. You pick the young spring shoots, boil and drain them, boil and drain again, and then do it a third time. This completely leaches out the toxic compounds, leaving you with delicious, perfectly safe, free greens. But because the FDA strictly categorizes pokeweed as a naturally occurring toxin, commercial sales are totally banned. There was even a company in Arkansas, Allen Canning, who safely canned poke salad for years. They actually had to shut down their commercial line entirely in 2000 just because of modern liability concerns.
And then we have the classic family smokehouse. A traditional smokehouse could preserve a family's pork for an entire year using just smoke, salt, and thyme. The cool mountain air combined with natural phenols from a slow hickory fire completely prevented bacterial growth. It's a beautiful process. But to modern food safety law, this technique is an absolute crisis. A traditional dirt floor smokehouse racks up roughly 14 separate FDA violations. We're talking unsealed floors, no electronic temperature monitoring, no hazard control plans, you name it. In 2018, a man in eastern Tennessee was investigated for selling bacon made the exact same way his family had made it since 1879. The result? A $4,000 fine. He actually had to tear his family's smokehouse down.
Or how about traditional Appalachian sauerkraut? This stuff ferments in a stone crock right in the kitchen at about 65 to 72 degrees for 6 weeks. This 500-year-old fermentation science creates a super acidic environment powered by lactic acid. And that environment is completely hostile to harmful bacteria like Listeria, Salmonella, and E. coli. It's scientifically remarkably safe. Yet modern state cottage food laws actually prohibit the sale of grandmother's unrefrigerated stone crock kraut. Why? Because it isn't processed in a strictly documented modern facility. It's just a brutal irony. This traditional kraut is technically safer than the bagged stuff you buy at the supermarket, but because it doesn't have an electronic paper trail, it is flat out illegal to sell. That brings us to Section 3, Criminalizing Community and Sharing, or the end of the barter economy. You see, federal laws that were originally written to target the big commercial movement of uninspected meat ended up doing something totally unintended. They effectively criminalized the communal, social fabric of mountain life. For 2 centuries, the November hog killing was this massive, essential community event. 6 or 8 families would gather at one farm, butcher the animals together, and at the end of a long day, every single family went home with fresh meat. Nobody paid anybody a dime. Communal labor was the community currency. But if you look at the Federal Meat Inspection Acts of 1906 and 1967, it is technically a federal felony to share, barter, or transfer uninspected pork if it crosses the original property line. Seriously, sharing a country ham with your sister-in-law down the road technically risks a federal violation. And in commercial cases, we're talking about fines over $20,000 and probation. And this rigid application of federal law hit community charity just as hard. Take the Logan County Venison Stew Supper in West Virginia. Now, mountain pragmatism meant you absolutely never let good meat go to waste. So, from 1962 all the way to 2008, a local church hosted a huge supper made entirely from freshly salvaged, donated roadkill venison. It fed the community for 46 years. It was a beloved tradition. But in 2008, the state shut the whole thing down. Here's the kicker. 28 states today actually allow roadkill salvage if you have a permit, but distributing that uninspected salvage meat to the public, even giving it away for free at a church, is completely federally illegal. Let's move to our final category, Section 4, the end of wild harvesting, regulating the forest itself. This is where things get kind of crazy. An absolute explosion in high-end restaurant demand turned free, unregulated mountain foraging into a highly penalized commodity market. The story of the Appalachian ramp is the perfect example of this. If you don't know, ramps are these incredibly pungent wild leeks. Before the 2000s, families could just wander out into the woods and forage 50 pounds of ramps for free, making a simple, delicious meal of ramps and taters. But then, the high-end culinary world discovered them. By the 2000s, restaurant demand pushed the price to $20 a pound. These are slow-growing plants, and they started vanishing from public lands almost overnight. Because of this, North Carolina enacted a strict no-tolerance policy in 2004. Today, picking undocumented ramps on public land can hit you with a devastating $5,000 fine. The forest used to be a free grocery store for these communities. Now, it's heavily patrolled. And then, there's the pawpaw. This is North America's largest native fruit. If you haven't had one, it tastes like this amazing custardy mix of mango and banana. It grows wild across 26 states, right in the Appalachian river bottoms. Mountain kids snacked on these for free for centuries. But pawpaws are super delicate, they bruise easily, and they don't ship well, so you're not going to find them sitting in your local supermarket. And because federal restrictions now prohibit commercial harvesting on public lands, you can't easily forage them to sell at a local farmer's market either. So we're left with this totally absurd legal reality. A fruit that grows wild in the backyards of millions of homes is now so tightly restricted that people literally pay $50 a pound online just to taste frozen pawpaw pulp from a legal private farm. Insane, right? All right, Section 5, Heritage versus Regulation, the final balance. So we've just looked at how dozens of these incredible mountain traditions essentially vanished. And here's the thing. These weren't just simple food hacks. They represented a people's profound, intimate relationship with their land and with each other. They were erased mostly because they relied on things like ambient temperatures, community trust, and natural intuition rather than electronic monitors and a stack of paperwork. I really want to leave you with a powerful question straight from our source material. Do the regulations protect us, or did they quietly end a way of feeding ourselves that worked for 300 years? Look back at the items we've explored today. Which of these traditional, outlawed foods would you most want to taste? Let that sit with you as you think about what we gain and ultimately what we lose in the name of progress. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep staying curious.